The diamond caught the light in a way that made time stand still. James was down on one knee, his eyes locked with mine, filled with a mixture of hope and nervousness that made my heart swell. Around us, Central Park was alive with the sounds of a perfect spring day, children laughing, birds singing, and the distant melody of a street performer's violin. "Emily Parker," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor I could feel in his hand as he held the ring. "You've been my best friend, my confidant, and my rock for the past 5 years. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" I couldn't speak. The ring, a stunning oval-cut diamond set in a platinum band with smaller diamonds circling it, glittered in the sunlight. It was exactly what I would have picked for myself, which didn't surprise me. James had always known me better than I knew myself. "Yes," I finally managed to whisper, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, of course, yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, cheers erupted around us. I hadn't even noticed the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by the universal magic of a proposal. James stood and pulled me into his arms, and as we kissed, I felt like I was floating. "I love you," he murmured against my lips. "I love you too," I replied, my voice still thick with emotion. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a blissful haze, walking hand in hand through the park, stopping occasionally to admire the ring on my finger. It felt both strange and completely right. "When did you know?" I asked as we sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. James smiled, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "Remember that day last winter when you got the flu? You were a complete mess. Red nose, puffy eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. You sneezed on me twice and then cried because you were so miserable." I groaned, burying my face in his shoulder. Not exactly a romantic moment. "But it was," he insisted, lifting my chin so I would look at him. "Because even then, looking like you'd been hit by a truck and sounding like a foghorn, you were still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And I knew I wanted to spend my life taking care of you when you're sick, celebrating with you when you're happy, and just being with you through everything else." Fresh tears welled in my eyes. How did I get so lucky? "I'm the lucky one," he said, kissing me softly. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, we finally left the park and headed to our favorite restaurant, where James had made reservations. The maitre d' congratulated us as we entered, and I realized James had called ahead to tell them about the proposal. We were led to a secluded table decorated with rose petals and candles. A bottle of champagne was already chilling in an ice bucket. "To us," James said, raising his glass after the waiter had poured. "To us," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. As we ate, we couldn't stop smiling at each other. Everything felt magical, as if we were in our own little bubble of happiness. "Should we call our parents?" I asked as we finished our dessert. James checked his watch. "It's not too late. Let's do it." We decided to call my parents first. My mother answered on the second ring. "Emily, how are you, sweetheart?" "Mom, I'm wonderful. Is Dad there? I have some news I want to share with both of you." "Robert," I heard her call. "Emily's on the phone. She has news." There was a shuffling sound, and then my father's voice joined the conversation. "We're both here, Em. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, looking at James for encouragement. He squeezed my hand and nodded. "James proposed today," I said, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. And I said yes. There was a moment of silence, and then my mother's squeal of delight nearly deafened me. "Oh my God, my baby's getting married. Robert, did you hear that? Our Emily is engaged." "Congratulations, sweetheart," my father said, his voice warm with emotion. "James is a lucky man." "When?" my mother demanded. "When did it happen? How? Did he propose? I want every detail." I laughed, feeling a rush of love for my enthusiastic, sometimes overwhelming parents. Today, Mom, in Central Park, it was perfect. The ring, she gasped. What's the ring like? It's beautiful, I said, admiring it again. An oval diamond with a diamond band. It's exactly what I would have chosen. Of course it is, my father said. That boy knows you better than anyone. We talked for a few more minutes, with my mother, already asking about dates and venues. I promised to come over for dinner soon so they could congratulate us in person and see the ring. Next, we called James's parents. His mother, Catherine, answered with her usual brisk efficiency. James, darling, how are you? I'm great, Mom. Better than great, actually. Is Dad around? He's right here. We're just finishing dinner. Should I put you on speaker? Yes, please. There was a click, and then his father's deep voice came through. James, Emily, good to hear from you both. We have some news, James said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with excitement as he looked at me. I asked Emily to marry me today, and she said yes. Unlike my parents' immediate enthusiasm, there was a pause before Catherine spoke. Well, that's wonderful news, darling. Congratulations to you both. Yes, congratulations, his father added, his tone warm but reserved. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. James's parents had always been polite to me, but I had never felt truly welcomed by them. They were old money, with a family history that went back generations, and I was just a middle-class girl from Queens whose parents had worked hard all their lives to give me opportunities they never had. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice bright. We're very happy. I'm sure you are, Catherine said. When are you thinking of having the wedding? James and I exchanged glances. We haven't had a chance to discuss that yet, Mom, he said. We just got engaged a few hours ago. Well, no rush, his father said. These things take time to plan properly. We chatted for a few more minutes, with his mother asking perfunctory questions about the proposal and the ring. When we hung up, I could see the slight tension in James's jaw. They're happy for us, he said, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. They just show it differently than your parents. I nodded, not wanting to dwell on it. Nothing could dampen my happiness today. After dinner, we walked back to our apartment, hand in hand. The streets of New York were alive with the energy that never seemed to diminish, even at night. Taxis honked, people laughed and talked as they spilled out of bars and restaurants, and the lights of the city sparkled like the diamond on my finger. Our apartment was on the 10th floor of a building in the West Village. It wasn't huge, but it had character, high ceilings, large windows, and a small balcony where we often sat with coffee on Sunday mornings, watching the city wake up. As soon as we closed the door behind us, James pulled me into his arms again. You've made me the happiest man in the world today, he murmured, his lips brushing against my temple. I smiled up at him. And you've made me the happiest woman. We fell asleep that night wrapped in each other's arms, the reality of our engagement still sinking in. As I drifted off, I thought about how perfect everything was. The proposal, the ring, the man sleeping beside me. I had no idea then how much our relationship would be tested in the months to come, or how the simple act of planning a wedding would unearth tensions and insecurities I didn't even know existed. But that night, all I felt was pure, unadulterated joy. I was going to marry the love of my life, and nothing could go wrong. Chapter 2. The First Cracks. The honeymoon phase. Of our engagement lasted exactly 2 weeks and 3 days. That was when my mother called with what she thought was exciting news. Emily, darling, I've been doing some research, and I found the most wonderful wedding venue. It's a beautiful old church in our neighborhood, and they have an opening in June of next year. Wouldn't that be perfect? And the reception could be at the community center. They do such a lovely job with weddings. I was in the middle of editing a manuscript. I worked as an editor at a small publishing house. and it took me a moment to process what she was saying. "Mom, slow down," I said, rubbing my temples. "James and I haven't even started thinking about venues yet. But you need to start soon, sweetheart. The good places book up quickly, and June is such a beautiful month for a wedding." I sighed, saving my work and closing my laptop. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mom, but we might want something different. James and I need to talk about what kind of wedding we want before we start booking anything." Of course, she said, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "I just thought I'd get a head start. Your father and I want to help, you know. We've been saving for your wedding since you were born." Guilt tugged at my heart. My parents weren't wealthy, but they had always been generous with what they had. I knew they wanted to give me the wedding of my dreams. "I know, Mom, and I'm grateful. But James and I need to figure out what our dreams are first. I'll call you once we've had a chance to talk, okay?" After we hung up, I sat staring at the wall for a few minutes. Until now, I hadn't given much thought to what kind of wedding I wanted. I'd been too caught up in the joy of being engaged. That evening, when James came home from his job at an investment firm, I broached the subject. "My mom called today," I said as we sat on the couch eating takeout Thai food. "She's already found a venue for us." James raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. Where?" "A church in Queens, near where I grew up, with the reception at the community center." He was quiet for a moment, pushing his food around with his fork. "And, is that what you want? A church wedding in Queens?" I set my plate down on the coffee table. "I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. What do you want?" He shrugged. "I always assumed we'd have something, I don't know, more upscale? Maybe at a hotel or a country club." "Like where your brother got married?" I asked, remembering the lavish affair at one of the most exclusive country clubs in Westchester. "Maybe," he said. "Or there are some beautiful hotels in the city. The Plaza, the St. Regis." I felt a flutter of anxiety. Those were some of the most expensive venues in New York. "James, those places cost a fortune." He set his plate down next to mine. "I know, but we only plan to do this once. And my parents would help." The knot in my stomach tightened. The idea of James's parents paying for our wedding made me uncomfortable. They had always made me feel like I wasn't quite good enough for their son, and accepting their money felt like giving them control over what should be our day. "My parents want to help too," I said. "They've been saving for this." James nodded. "That's great. But realistically, Em, how much can they contribute? Those kinds of venues are expensive." I felt a flash of defensiveness. "So we should just let your parents pay for everything? Make it their wedding instead of ours?" He looked surprised by my tone. "That's not what I meant. I want our wedding to be special." "And it wouldn't be special in a church in Queens?" "That's not what I said," he replied, his own voice growing tense. "I just think we should consider all our options before we decide." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. This was our first real discussion about our wedding, and I didn't want it to turn into an argument. "You're right," I said. "We should look at different venues and see what feels right for us." He reached for my hand. "Exactly. This is our wedding, Em. We should have exactly what we want." I nodded, but as we cleaned up dinner and settled in to watch a movie, I couldn't shake the feeling that what James wanted and what I wanted might be two very different things. The next day, I called my mother to tell her we weren't ready to commit to a venue yet. She was disappointed but understanding. "Of course, sweetheart. You and James take your time. But don't wait too long. The good places really do book up quickly." I promised we would start looking soon, and we did. Over the next few weeks, we visited several venues: churches, hotels, country clubs, even a few converted warehouses that had become popular for weddings. The more places we saw, the clearer it became that James and I had different visions for our wedding. He gravitated toward the grand and formal. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, elaborate floral arrangements. I found myself drawn to simpler, more intimate settings, places with character and warmth rather than opulence. The breaking point came when we visited the plaza. It was undeniably beautiful, with its grand ballroom and storied history. But as the event coordinator quoted us a price that made my eyes widen, I saw James nodding as if it was exactly what he had expected. "We'll need to think about it," I said quickly, before he could commit to anything. In the taxi on the way home, I couldn't hold back anymore. "James, we can't afford that place. It's ridiculous." He looked at me, genuinely confused. "My parents can help. They want to." "I don't want your parents to pay for our wedding," I said, the words coming out more sharply than I intended. "Why not? They're going to be your family too." I stared out the window, watching the city blur past. "Because I don't want to feel like I owe them anything. They already think I'm not good enough." "For you?" James's expression hardened. "That's not true, Emily." "Isn't it? Your mother has barely spoken to me since we got engaged. And when she does, it's about how I should wear my hair or what kind of dress would be appropriate for a wedding at the plaza. She's just trying to help." "No, she's trying to control everything. And if we let your parents pay, that's exactly what will happen. It won't be our wedding anymore. It will be theirs." We rode the rest of the way home in silence. When we got to our apartment, James went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the couch feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. After a while, he came out and sat beside me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't realize how strongly you felt about this." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "I just want our wedding to feel like us, you know? Not like some fancy event that could be anyone's wedding." He nodded. "I get that. But I also want it to be special. Something we'll both remember forever." "It will be," I assured him. "Because we'll be marrying each other. The rest is just details." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Details that matter, though." We agreed to take a break from venue hunting for a few days and just enjoy being engaged. But the tension lingered, an undercurrent in our otherwise happy relationship. A week later, James came home with a surprise. "I found a place I think you'll love," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "It's a compromise. Not as formal as the plaza, but still elegant, and the price is more reasonable." The next day, he took me to a boutique hotel in Chelsea. It had a rooftop garden with views of the city skyline and an indoor space with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's beautiful," I admitted, feeling a surge of hope. Maybe we could find a middle ground after all. The event coordinator, a woman named Sophia with a warm smile and an air of quiet efficiency, showed us around. Unlike some of the other venues we'd visited, she didn't pressure us or immediately start talking about packages and prices. She simply let us explore and answered our questions. "What do you think?" James asked as we stood in the garden, looking out at the skyline. I squeezed his hand. "I love it. It feels special without being pretentious." Relief washed over his face. "That's exactly what I thought. And they have dates available next spring." After we had seen everything, Sophia sat down with us to discuss details. The price was still high, higher than what my parents could comfortably afford, but not as astronomical as the plaza. "We can make this work," James said, looking at me for confirmation. "Maybe your parents could contribute what they're comfortable with, and mine could cover the rest." I hesitated, still uncomfortable with the idea of his parents paying for most of our wedding. But I also knew how important this was to James, and the venue really was perfect. "Okay," I said finally. "But we need to be clear with your parents that this is still our wedding. They can't take over just because they're paying." He kissed me, right there in front of Sophia. "I promise, I'll talk to them." We put down a deposit that day, securing a date in late April. As we left the hotel, hand in hand, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. We had taken the first big step in planning our wedding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle over control was just beginning. Chapter 3. Family Dynamics. The dinner with James's parents was set for Saturday evening at their elegant brownstone on the Upper East Side. I spent the entire day feeling nervous, changing my outfit 3 times before settling on a simple, black dress that I hoped struck the right balance between formal and not trying too hard. "You look beautiful," James assured me as we stood outside his parents' door. "And stop worrying. They're going to be thrilled we found a venue we both love." I nodded, taking a deep breath as he rang the bell. A moment later, the door was opened by his mother, Catherine, immaculate as always in a tailored gray dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon. "James, Emily," she said, air-kissing us both. "Right on time. Your father's in the living room, darling. Go on through." The Harrington home was like something out of a magazine, all clean lines, expensive antiques, and artwork that was probably worth more than everything I owned combined. I had been here many times over the years we'd been dating, but I never felt entirely comfortable. James's father, Richard, stood as we entered the living room. He was tall and distinguished, with the same dark hair and blue eyes as his son. Unlike his wife, he greeted me with genuine warmth, giving me a brief hug. "Emily, good to see you. Can I get you a drink? Wine? Something stronger?" "Wine would be lovely, thank you," I said, grateful for something to do with my hands. As Richard poured drinks, Catherine settled herself in an armchair, her posture perfect. "So, how is the wedding planning coming along? Have you started looking at venues?" James and I exchanged a smile. "Actually, that's what we wanted to talk to you about," he said. "We found a place we both love, a boutique hotel in Chelsea with a rooftop garden." Catherine's expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of something, disappointment perhaps, in her eyes. "Chelsea? Not the Plaza?" "The Plaza was a bit over the top for what we want," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "This place is beautiful and more us." "I see," she said, though it was clear she didn't, not really. "And when is this wedding to take place?" "April 28th, James said. "We put down a deposit yesterday." Richard handed me a glass of wine, and I took a grateful sip. "Well, that's excellent news. Congratulations on finding a place you both like. That's half the battle, I'm told." "It is," I agreed. "And it wasn't easy. We both had different ideas about what we wanted." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what sort of ideas?" I glanced at James, hoping he would take the lead on this potentially tricky subject. He did, setting his glass down and leaning forward. "Emily wanted something more intimate and personal. I was thinking more along the lines of traditional and formal, but this place is a perfect compromise, elegant but not stuffy." "And the cost?" Richard asked, always the businessman. James named a figure that made me wince internally, even though I had already come to terms with it. Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Reasonable for New York. And how are you planning to handle the finances?" Here it was, the moment I'd been dreading. James looked at me for a second before answering. "Well, that's one of the things we wanted to discuss with you. Emily's parents have been saving for her wedding, and they want to contribute, but they can't cover all of it. We were hoping that we would help," Catherine finished for him. "Of course we will. You're our only son, James. We want your wedding to be perfect." The way she said perfect made me uneasy, as if our idea of perfect and hers might be very different things. "That's very generous," I said. "But we want to be clear that while we appreciate your help, this is still our wedding. We want to make the decisions about how it looks and feels." Catherine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. But surely you'll want some guidance. Planning a wedding of this caliber isn't simple. I'm sure Emily and James have their own ideas, Richard interjected, giving his wife a look I couldn't quite interpret. And they're both intelligent, capable people. They'll figure it out. With help, Catherine added. I have a list of excellent wedding planners. Let me get it for you. Before I could protest, she had swept out of the room. James squeezed my hand reassuringly. Wedding planner might not be a bad idea, Em, he said quietly. We're both busy with work. It could take some of the pressure off. I nodded reluctantly. He had a point, but I couldn't help feeling like we were already losing control of our own wedding. Catherine returned with a small leather-bound notebook. Here we are. These are the top wedding planners in the city. I've worked with several of them for charity events, and they're all excellent. She handed the notebook to James, who thanked her. Dinner was announced shortly after, and we moved to the dining room, where the conversation shifted to other topics. James's work, my latest editing project, Richard's golf game. It was during dessert that Catherine brought the wedding up again. Have you thought about your dress, Emily? I took a bite of chocolate mousse before answering. Not specifically. I know, I want something simple and elegant, not too fussy. Catherine nodded, but I could tell she was already forming her own opinions. There's a wonderful designer I know who could create something just for you. Very exclusive, very tasteful. Thank you, but I was planning to look at some boutiques with my mother and sister. It's something we've always talked about doing together. Of course, she said, her tone suggesting she found the idea quaint. But do keep an open mind. The right dress can make all the difference. By the time we left, I felt emotionally drained. As we walked to the subway station, I remained quiet, processing the evening. That wasn't so bad, was it? James asked, slipping his arm around my waist. I sighed. Your father was great. Your mother is already trying to take over. She's just excited, he defended, and she has good taste. It's not about her taste, James. It's about what we want. This is our wedding. He stopped walking and turned to face me. I know that, and it will be. But would it be so bad to listen to her suggestions? She knows about these things. I felt a flare of irritation. And my mother doesn't? Because she hasn't attended fancy galas and charity events? Because she shops at department stores instead of designer boutiques? James ran a hand through his hair, a sign he was getting frustrated. That's not what I meant. But yes, our mothers come from different worlds. That doesn't make either of them wrong. No, but it means they have different ideas about what's important. And right now, it feels like you're siding with your mother's version of what our wedding should be. I'm not siding with anyone, he said, his voice rising slightly. I just think we should consider all the options before we dismiss anything. I took a deep breath, not wanting to argue on the street. Fine, let's look at her list of wedding planners. But we make the final decisions about everything. He smiled, relaxing a little. Absolutely. Our wedding. Our choices. I nodded, but as we continued walking, I couldn't help wondering if it would really be that simple. The next day, we called my parents to tell them about the venue. My mother's enthusiasm was genuine, if a bit forced when she heard the price. It sounds lovely, sweetheart, and we'll contribute as much as we can. Your father and I have been putting away a little each month since you were born. I know, Mom, and I appreciate it more than I can say. But James's parents are going to help too, so don't worry about the cost. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. That's very generous of them. I could hear what she wasn't saying, that she was worried about being overshadowed, about not being able to give her daughter the wedding she deserved. We're still going dress shopping together, I assured her. You, me, and Sarah, just like we always planned. I'd like that, she said, her voice brightening. I've been collecting ideas. Nothing fancy, just some styles I thought might suit you. I can't wait to see them, I said, and I meant it. My mother knew me better than anyone, except perhaps James. She wouldn't try to turn me into someone I wasn't. After I hung up, I showed James the list of wedding planners his mother had provided. Most of them had websites showcasing weddings that looked like they belonged in magazines. Elaborate, extravagant affairs with price tags to match. These all seem excessive, I said as we scrolled through another gallery of crystal-draped tablescapes and towering floral arrangements. James frowned. They're high-end, sure. But isn't that what we want? A beautiful, memorable wedding? Beautiful, yes. But does memorable have to mean expensive? Some of these look like they cost more than our apartment. He closed the laptop. What if we compromise? We'll interview a couple from my mother's list, but also look for someone who might have a more moderate approach. It seemed fair, so I agreed. We set up meetings with 3 planners from Catherine's list and 2 others I found through research. The first meeting was with a woman named Veronica, who had planned weddings for minor celebrities and Wall Street executives. She arrived at our apartment precisely on time, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. So, she said after we had exchanged pleasantries and she had inspected our venue choice with a critical eye, "Tell me about your vision for the wedding." James and I looked at each other. We had discussed this beforehand, agreeing to present a united front. "We want something elegant, but not ostentatious," I began. "Something that feels like us, warm, inclusive, but still special." Veronica nodded, making notes. "And the guest list? How many are we talking about?" "Around 150, James said. "Family and close friends." She wrote this down. "And the budget?" James named a figure that we had agreed on, though it still made me wince internally. It was more money than I had ever contemplated spending on a single day. Veronica's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Calculation. Perhaps. Or disappointment that we weren't offering her carte blanche. "That's workable," she said finally. "Though you may need to make some compromises on certain elements." "Such as?" I asked. "Flowers, for instance. You'd be surprised how quickly the cost adds up, especially if you want something unique. And the menu, per plate costs at high-end venues can be substantial." For the next hour, she outlined what she could do within our budget. It was impressive, I had to admit, but also felt somehow generic, as if she was working from a template, rather than trying to understand who we were as a couple. The next 2 planners from Catherine's list were similar. Professional, polished, with portfolios full of weddings that looked beautiful but identical, like something out of a luxury magazine. It was the 4th planner, Rachel, who finally felt right. She wasn't on Catherine's list. I had found her through a blog about weddings on a budget that still looked elegant. She arrived for our meeting in a colorful dress, carrying a portfolio and a genuine smile. "First of all," she said after we had introduced ourselves, "congratulations. Getting married is a big deal, and I'm honored that you're considering me to help with your day." Already, she felt more personal than the others, who had treated our wedding as just another project. "Tell me about yourselves," she continued. "How you met, what you love about each other, what's important to you. The more I know about you as a couple, the better I can help create a wedding that feels authentic." For the next half hour, we talked about how we had met at a mutual friend's birthday party, our first date at a tiny Italian restaurant in the village, the trips we had taken together, the things we loved and the things that drove us crazy about each other. Rachel listened, laughed with us, and asked questions that showed she was truly interested. When we finally got around to discussing the wedding itself, I felt like she actually understood what we were looking for. "I specialize in what I call smart luxury," she explained, "finding ways to create a beautiful, meaningful experience without unnecessary extravagance. It's about being intentional with your budget, spending on the things that matter most to you, and finding creative solutions. For the rest, It was exactly what I had been trying to articulate all along. James, too, seemed impressed by her approach. For instance, she continued, if music is really important to you, we might allocate more of the budget to an amazing band. If food is your passion, we focus on creating an incredible menu. It's about priorities, not compromises. By the end of our meeting, we were both sold. Rachel understood our vision, respected our budget, and seemed genuinely excited about working with us. We hired her on the spot. When we told James's mother that we had chosen a wedding planner not from her list, her disapproval was palpable, even over the phone. I hope you know what you're doing, James, she said. These society weddings require a certain finesse. Not just anyone can pull them off successfully. Rachel is very experienced, Mom, James assured her, and her approach aligns better with what Emily and I want, which is a wedding that feels like us, not like a generic society event. There was a pause, and I could almost see Catherine pressing her lips together in that way she had when she disapproved but was trying not to show it. Well, it's your decision, of course. I just hope you won't regret it. After we hung up, James looked at me apologetically. She'll come around. Once she meets Rachel and sees her work, she'll understand why we chose her. I nodded, wanting to believe him. But I was beginning to realize that the wedding planning process was going to be a minefield of family expectations and differing visions. My own mother, when I told her about Rachel, was enthusiastic. She sounds wonderful, Emily. Someone who really gets what you and James want. She is, I agreed. I think she'll help us create something beautiful without going completely overboard. Your father will be relieved, my mother said with a laugh. He's been having nightmares about having to sell the house to pay for your wedding. I laughed too, but there was a hint of real anxiety behind the joke. My parents weren't poor, but they weren't wealthy either. They had worked hard all their lives, my father as a high school teacher, my mother as a nurse, to provide for my sister and me, to send us to good colleges, to give us opportunities they hadn't had. The idea of them struggling to contribute to a wedding that was becoming more elaborate than I had ever wanted made me profoundly uncomfortable. Tell Dad not to worry, I said. We're going to keep things under control. This wedding isn't going to bankrupt anyone. But as the weeks went by and we dove deeper into the planning process, I began to wonder if that was a promise I could keep. Chapter 4, The Escalation. Rachel, true to her word, approached our wedding planning with creativity and thoughtfulness. She listened to our ideas, offered suggestions that aligned with our vision, and respected our budget constraints. But the process wasn't without its challenges, particularly when it came to navigating family dynamics. 6 weeks after we hired Rachel, we had a meeting scheduled to discuss the catering options. James's mother had asked to attend, and though I was hesitant, I agreed. It seemed like a gesture of inclusion that might ease some of the tension. Rachel arrived at our apartment. First, her usual cheerful self, armed with menus from 3 different caterers she thought would be a good fit for us. They all work with the venue regularly, she explained as we waited for Catherine. And they all have excellent reputations. Each offers something a little different, so you have real choices, not just variations on the same theme. When Catherine arrived, she was cordial but reserved, assessing Rachel with the same critical eye she had once turned on me when James first brought me home to meet his parents. Mrs. Harrington, it's a pleasure to meet you, Rachel said, extending her hand. James and Emily have told me so much about you. Catherine shook her hand briefly. Yes, well, I'm very interested to see your approach to my son's wedding. The Harrington name carries certain expectations in this city. I felt my shoulders tense, but Rachel didn't miss a beat. Of course, and James and Emily have a very clear vision for their day. Elegant, meaningful, and authentically reflective of who they are as a couple. I think you'll be very proud. Catherine's expression softened slightly, very slightly, and we moved on to discussing the menus. The first caterer Rachel presented specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, using locally sourced ingredients to create seasonal menus. The sample menu she showed us included dishes that sounded both sophisticated and approachable. Heirloom tomato salad with burrata and basil, slow-roasted salmon with spring vegetables, chocolate hazelnut torte for dessert. Everything is made from scratch, Rachel explained. They're committed to quality and sustainability, which aligns with Emily and James's values. I nodded, already loving this option. James, too, seemed impressed. But Catherine frowned. "It sounds very rustic," she said, the word clearly not a compliment in her vocabulary. "What about the other options?" The second caterer was more traditional, with a French-influenced menu that Catherine preferred. "This is more appropriate for a wedding of this caliber," she said, nodding approvingly at the foie gras appetizer and truffle-infused entrees. The third presented a fusion menu, blending elements of different cuisines in creative ways. It was the most expensive of the three but offered a unique experience that might make our wedding stand out. "Which one are you leaning toward, Rachel?" asked James and me after we had reviewed all the options. I looked at James, hoping we were on the same page. "I really liked the first one," I said. "The farm to table. It feels fresh and unpretentious, but still special." James nodded. "I agree. And their emphasis on quality ingredients means the food will be excellent." Catherine's disapproval was palpable. "James, darling, are you sure? It's a lovely concept for a summer dinner party, but for your wedding, people expect a certain level of sophistication." "Mom, the food will be sophisticated," James said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "It's not like they're serving beans on toast. This is high-end cuisine that happens to be sustainable and locally sourced. I just think—" "Catherine," Rachel interjected smoothly, "why don't we arrange a tasting? That way, you can experience the quality for yourself before any final decisions are made." It was a diplomatic solution that gave everyone an out, and Catherine reluctantly agreed. But as she was leaving, she pulled James aside, speaking in a low voice that I still managed to overhear. "James, I'm concerned that this wedding is becoming less and less what we discussed. The venue is one thing, but now the food. These are not the choices I expected from you." James sighed. "They're the choices Emily and I made together, Mom. This is our wedding, remember?" Catherine glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Of course. I just hope you're not compromising too much." The implication was clear. I was the compromise. The venue, the food, the whole wedding. They were all being downgraded because of me and my middle-class sensibilities. After she left, I felt deflated. Rachel, sensing my mood, squeezed my arm. "You're doing great, Emily. Standing up for what you want isn't always easy, especially when family dynamics are involved." "Thanks," I said. "I just wish I didn't feel like I'm constantly having to defend my choices." "Welcome to wedding planning," she said with a wry smile. "But for what it's worth, I think you and James have excellent taste. This wedding is going to be beautiful." James and I had a long talk that night about his mother's behavior and how we would handle it going forward. He was apologetic, but also defensive. "She means well, Em. She just wants the best for us." "No, she wants what she thinks is best." "There's a difference." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but she's my mother, and she is contributing a lot of money to this wedding. So that gives her the right to make us feel bad about our choices? To imply that I'm somehow dragging you down?" "She didn't say that." "She didn't have to. It was pretty clear what she meant by compromising too much." James was quiet for a moment. "Look, I'll talk to her. Make it clear that while we appreciate her input, these are our decisions to make." I nodded, but I was beginning to understand that this tension would be a constant presence throughout our planning process. Catherine Harrington had a vision for her only son's wedding, and it didn't include a moderately priced caterer or a boutique hotel in Chelsea. And while James claimed to be on my side, I could see the subtle pull of his upbringing, the desire to please his parents that was deeply ingrained in him. The dress shopping experience a few weeks later only confirmed my fears. As promised, I went with my mother and sister to several boutiques in the city. The first few were within our budget, offering beautiful but reasonably priced gowns. But, at the last minute, my mother surprised me. "I've made an appointment at Kleinfeld," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I know it's a bit extravagant, but I thought it would be fun to look, even if we don't find anything." Kleinfeld was one of the most famous and expensive bridal salons in the city. I hesitated, not wanting to get my hopes up for dresses I couldn't afford. "Mom, I don't know. Just to look," she insisted. "A once-in-a-lifetime experience." So we went, the three of us, to the iconic salon. Our consultant, a woman named Talia with an expert eye and a gentle manner, listened carefully as I described what I was looking for. Something simple but elegant, nothing too princess-like or ornate. "I think I have just the thing," she said, disappearing into the vast collection of white gowns. She returned with several options, each more beautiful than the last. But it was the third dress that took my breath away. A sleek, sophisticated A-line with delicate lace sleeves and a modest train. It wasn't flashy or over the top, but when I put it on, I knew immediately it was the one. When I stepped out of the fitting room to show my mother and sister, they both gasped. "Oh, Emily," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. "You look absolutely beautiful." Sarah, my sister, nodded in agreement. "It's perfect, Em. Totally you." I turned to look in the mirror, hardly recognizing myself. The dress was everything I had wanted. Elegant, timeless, with just enough detail to make it special without being ostentatious. "How much is it?" I asked Talia quietly. She told me, and my heart sank. It was significantly more than I had budgeted for. I looked at my mother, who seemed to read my mind. "Your father and I want to pay for your dress," she said firmly. "It's traditional, and we've been saving for this." "Mom, it's too much. I can find something similar for less." She shook her head. "This is the one, Emily. I can see it in your face, and it's important to us to do this for you." I knew how much this meant to her. To be able to give me something truly special, to participate in this traditional mother-daughter ritual, and the dress was perfect. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Absolutely," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. So I said yes to the dress, feeling a mixture of guilt and gratitude. My parents were stretching themselves financially to give me this gift, and I didn't take that lightly. When I told James about the dress later, not the details, just that I had found one and my parents were buying it, he was genuinely happy for me. "That's wonderful, Em. I can't wait to see you in it." "It's more than we had planned to spend," I admitted. But my mom insisted. He pulled me into a hug. "Your parents love you. They want to do this for you. Let them." It was the right response, and I appreciated it. But I couldn't help wondering if he would have been as supportive if the dress had been even more expensive. If it had been the kind of gown his mother would have chosen. The next major decision was flowers. And here again, the differences in taste and budget expectations became apparent. Rachel had arranged for us to meet with 3 florists, each with a different aesthetic and price point. The first, a young woman named Maya with a studio in Brooklyn, specialized in seasonal, locally grown flowers arranged in a natural, almost wild style. Her portfolio showed bouquets and centerpieces that looked like they had been gathered from a meadow, loose, organic, full of texture and movement. "I love this," I said, showing James a photo of a bride holding a bouquet of garden roses, ranunculus, and greenery. "It's romantic, without being too structured." The second florist, recommended by one of James's colleagues, had a more traditional approach: tight, formal arrangements of roses, lilies, and orchids. The designs were beautiful, but felt a bit generic to me. The third, suggested by Catherine, was a high-end floral designer who had worked on events for the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the New York Ballet. His creations were undeniably stunning, elaborate, installations of exotic blooms imported from around the world. But the price tag was equally stunning. "These are incredible," James said as we flipped through the portfolio. "Imagine the impact when guests walk into the reception and see something like this." I frowned. "James, these arrangements cost more than some people's entire weddings. It's excessive." He looked disappointed. "I thought we agreed this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that we were going to make it special." "Special doesn't have to mean the most expensive option," I argued. "Maya's designs are beautiful and unique, and they align with our values. Using seasonal, local flowers is better for the environment, and they'll still make a statement." We went back and forth, each becoming more entrenched in our position. Finally, Rachel suggested a compromise. We would work with Maya for most of the floral elements, including my bouquet and the centerpieces, but incorporate a more dramatic installation from the high-end florist for the entrance to the reception. That way, you get the statement piece James wants, but with a more sustainable and budget-friendly approach overall, she explained. It was a reasonable solution, and we both agreed. But the conversation left me unsettled. These disagreements were becoming more frequent, and I was starting to worry about what they revealed about our different values and expectations. That night, I called my sister, needing to vent to someone who wasn't directly involved in the wedding planning. "I don't know, Sarah," I said after recounting the flower debate. "Sometimes I feel like James and I are planning two different weddings. He keeps pushing for the more expensive, elaborate options, and I keep trying to pull it back to something that feels more us. Or more you," Sarah pointed out. "Maybe the fancy stuff does feel like him." I hadn't considered that perspective. "You think so? I mean, he grew up with money, Em. With parents who threw lavish parties and attended charity galas. That's his normal. But he's never been flashy or materialistic. It's one of the things I love about him." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Maybe this isn't about being flashy. Maybe it's about what a wedding means to him. A chance to celebrate with everyone he cares about, to create a memorable experience. But at what cost? Both financially and in terms of our relationship? Every decision feels like a battle." "Have you talked to him about how you're feeling? Not just about specific details, but about the bigger picture?" I sighed. "Not really. I don't want to come across as the nagging fiancé who's constantly complaining about money." "But it's not just about money, is it? It's about values, about what's important to you both." She was right, of course. These disagreements about flowers and food and venues were really about something deeper: our different backgrounds, our different perspectives on what mattered in life. "Talk to him, Em," Sarah urged, "before this wedding takes over your relationship." I promised I would, but finding the right moment and the right words proved difficult. James had been working late all week, coming home exhausted and falling asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. And I had my own deadlines at work, manuscripts that needed to be edited and returned to their anxious authors. It wasn't until the weekend that we had a real chance to talk. We were having breakfast at our favorite cafe, a small place a few blocks from our apartment that made the best pancakes in the city. "I feel like I haven't seen you properly in days," James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "How are you? Really?" It was the opening I needed. "Honestly, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and not just with the wedding planning itself, but with the way it's highlighting some differences between us that I'm not sure how to reconcile." He frowned. "What differences?" I took a deep breath. "James, every time we have to make a decision about the wedding, you push for the more expensive, elaborate option. And when I suggest something simpler, it's like you see it as settling for less rather than just having different priorities. He was quiet for a moment, considering my words. I don't think of it as settling. I just want our wedding to be exceptional. But what does exceptional mean? To me, it means meaningful, personal, a true reflection of who we are as a couple. It doesn't necessarily mean the most expensive flowers or the fanciest venue. And you think that's what it means to me? Just throwing money at everything? I could hear the hurt in his voice, and I regretted my choice of words. No, that's not what I meant. I know you want the wedding to be beautiful and memorable, but sometimes it feels like you're trying to impress people rather than create something that feels authentic to us. That's not fair, Emily. I'm not trying to impress anyone. Really? Not even your parents? Because every time your mother disapproves of one of our choices, you seem to waver, to second-guess what we've decided. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. My parents are contributing a lot of money to this wedding. Of course I want them to be happy with how it turns out. But it's our wedding, James, not theirs. And sometimes I worry that we're creating an event that reflects their values and expectations more than our own. What's wrong with their values? He asked, his voice rising slightly. Is it so terrible to want a beautiful, elegant wedding? To want to provide our guests with an exceptional experience? No, there's nothing wrong with that. But there is something wrong with spending money we don't have to impress people we barely know, just because that's what's expected in your parents' social circle. The conversation was veering into dangerous territory. The unspoken class differences that had always existed between us but had rarely been acknowledged so explicitly. James's expression hardened. So that's what this is really about? You think I'm some kind of snob who can't let go of his privileged upbringing? That's not what I said. It's what you implied, that I'm shallow and materialistic, more concerned with appearances than substance. James, no. I'm just trying to understand why this wedding seems to be getting bigger and more elaborate with each decision we make, when that was never what we discussed wanting. He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his half-eaten pancakes. When he finally looked up, his expression was softer, more vulnerable. Maybe I do care more about certain aspects of the wedding than I thought I would, he admitted. But it's not about impressing people or living up to some societal expectation. It's about, I don't know, creating a day that feels special, magical even. A day we'll remember for the rest of our lives. I reached across the table to take his hand. I want that too, but we don't need to spend a fortune to create magic. Some of the most memorable moments in our relationship have been the simplest ones. Watching the sunset from our balcony, walking through Central Park in the snow, cooking dinner together on a random Tuesday night. He squeezed my hand. I know. And those moments mean the world to me. But a wedding is different. It's once in a lifetime. Don't you want it to be extraordinary? Of course I do. But extraordinary doesn't have to mean extravagant. It can mean thoughtful, personal, filled with meaning rather than just expensive details. He nodded slowly. I see your point, and I'm not trying to dismiss your concerns. I want to give you everything, Em. The perfect day, the perfect start to our life together. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tight with emotion. You already have given me everything that matters, I said softly. Your love, your partnership, your future. The wedding is just one day. It's the marriage that matters. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You're right. And I promise to try to remember that when I get caught up in the details. We finished our breakfast in a more harmonious mood, having reached, if not a complete resolution, at least a better understanding of each other's perspective. But as we continued with the wedding planning in the weeks that followed, I noticed that while James made an effort to consider my viewpoint, the wedding was still growing in size and cost. Each decision seemed to build on the last, each choice setting a precedent that made it harder to pull back on subsequent elements. The guest list, which had started at around 150, had somehow expanded to nearly 200 as James's parents insisted on inviting business associates and family friends we had never met. The simple cocktail hour we had envisioned now included a raw bar and a champagne fountain. The band, once a modest 5-piece, had grown to include additional musicians and a string quartet for the ceremony. And with each new addition, each escalation, I felt a growing sense of disconnect from the wedding we were planning. It was beautiful, yes, elegant certainly, but was it us? I wasn't so sure anymore. The breaking point came 3 months before the wedding, when Catherine suggested, no, insisted, that we add a second event the night before the wedding, a rehearsal dinner for 60 people at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It's tradition, she argued when I expressed concern about the additional cost and complexity. And many of our out-of-town guests will be arriving the day before. We can't leave them to fend for themselves. A small dinner for the wedding? Party would be lovely, I said, trying to be diplomatic. But 60 people is practically a second wedding reception. Emily, she said, her tone patronizing, in our circle, this is standard. James's brother had a rehearsal dinner for 80 at the Pierre. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that I wasn't part of their circle and had no desire to be. Instead, I looked to James for support. But he just shrugged. If my parents want to host a rehearsal dinner, what's the harm? They're paying for it. In that moment, I felt completely alone. James, who had promised to stand with me, to remember that this was our wedding, had once again defaulted to his parents' expectations. The harm, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, is that this wedding is becoming something I don't recognize anymore, something that doesn't feel like us at all. I stood up, suddenly needing to get away. I need some air. I'll talk. To you later. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my coat and purse and left the apartment. It was a cold February day, the kind that makes your eyes water and your cheeks sting. But the physical discomfort was a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil inside me. I walked for hours, with no particular destination in mind. I thought about James, about our relationship, about the life we had planned together. I thought about our wedding, which had morphed from a joyful celebration of our love into a society event designed to impress people I barely knew. When I finally returned to the apartment, it was nearly dark. James was sitting on the couch, his face lined with worry. Emily, he said, standing as I came in. I've been trying to call you. I was worried. My phone died, I said. Which was true, though I hadn't noticed until I'd tried to call Sarah halfway through my walk. Where have you been? Walking, thinking. He approached me cautiously, as if I might bolt again. About? I took a deep breath. About us. About this wedding. About whether we're making a huge mistake. His face paled. What are you saying? You don't want to marry me. No, that's not. I do want to marry you, James. I love you. But I don't want this wedding. It's become this monstrous thing that has nothing to do with who we are or what we value. He led me to the couch, and we sat together, a small but noticeable gap between us. Emily, I know things have gotten a bit more elaborate than we initially planned, but a bit more elaborate? I interrupted, incredulous. James, we're spending more on flowers than my parents paid for my sister's entire wedding. We've invited people neither of us have ever met. And now your mother wants to add a rehearsal dinner that costs more than some people's cars. This isn't a bit more elaborate. This is completely out of control. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing my words. I didn't realize you were this unhappy with the plans. Haven't you been listening? I've been expressing concerns for months. But every time, you either dismiss them or promise to consider my viewpoint, only to side with your parents at the next decision point. That's not fair. I've compromised on plenty of things. Like what? Because from where I'm sitting, every single element of this wedding has escalated far beyond what we originally discussed. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, seemingly unable to come up with a specific example. James, I said, softening my tone, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to understand what's happening here. This wedding was supposed to be about us, about our love, our future. But it's turned into this performance for your parents' social circle. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe that's a sign of something deeper, some fundamental disconnect in how we see the world. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully. I mean that maybe these disagreements about the wedding aren't just about the wedding. Maybe they're about our values, our priorities, how we want to live our lives. He ran a hand through his hair. Emily, wanting a beautiful wedding doesn't mean I have different values than you. It just means I want to celebrate our love in a way that feels special. But that's just it, James. This doesn't feel special to me. It feels excessive, wasteful even. And every time I try to pull it back to something that feels more authentic, more us, I'm overruled. By your mother, by the wedding planner, even by you. That's not true. Rachel has been very respectful of your input. Rachel works for us. She'll do whatever we tell her to do. And lately, what we're telling her to do is create the kind of wedding your mother wants, not the kind I want. He was silent again, and I could see him struggling to process what I was saying. What do you want, Emily? Really? Because if you're unhappy with specific elements of the wedding, we can change them. It's not too late. I shook my head. It's not about specific elements anymore. It's about the whole approach. This wedding has become a symbol of everything I don't want our marriage to be. Focused on appearances, driven by external expectations rather than our own desires. So what are you saying? You want to cancel the wedding? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Did I want to cancel the wedding? The thought had crossed my mind during my long walk, but I hadn't allowed myself to fully consider it until now. I don't know, I said finally. Maybe not cancel, but change. Dramatically. Scale back to something that actually feels like us. James's expression was a mixture of confusion and hurt. But we've already paid deposits. Invitations are about to go out. People have made travel arrangements. I know, and I'm sorry for the timing, but isn't it better to make these changes now than to go through with a wedding that feels wrong? He stood up abruptly, pacing the small space of our living room. I don't understand, Emily. You've been involved in every decision. You've seen the plans evolve. Why are you only now saying it's all wrong? I've been saying it all along, I exclaimed, frustration rising. Every time I suggested a simpler option, every time I expressed concern about the cost or the scale, I was saying this isn't what I want. But no one was listening. I was listening. I just didn't realize how strongly you felt. Because you didn't want to. Because it was easier to go along with what your parents wanted than to stand up for what we said we wanted. His face hardened. That's not fair. I've been trying to create a wedding that makes everyone happy. But everyone isn't getting married. We are. And right now, one half of that we is extremely unhappy. We stared at each other across the room, the distance between us feeling both physical and emotional. Finally, James sat back down, his posture deflated. What do you want to do? He asked, his voice quiet. It was a good question, and one I wasn't entirely sure how to answer. Cancel everything and elope? Try to scale back an event that had already taken on a life of its own? Push through and hope that once the wedding was over, we could return to being the couple I knew we could be? I need time to think, I said finally. And I think you do too. Maybe we should take a break from wedding planning for a few days, get some perspective. He nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Okay, if that's what you need. I stood up. I'm going to stay with Sarah for a couple of nights. Just to clear my head. His head snapped up. You're leaving? Just for a little while. I think we both need some space to figure out what we really want. He didn't try to stop me as I packed a small bag, nor as I called a cab. But as I was about to walk out the door, he spoke. I love you, Emily. More than anything. Please remember that. I turned to look at him, this man I had agreed to spend my life with, and felt a painful mixture of love and doubt. I love you too. That's why this is so hard. The cab ride to Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn was a blur. I stared out the window, at the city lights, feeling numb and exhausted. Sarah, bless her, asked no questions when I showed up at her door with red-rimmed eyes and a weekend bag. She simply made up the couch, poured me a glass of wine, and sat with me in silence until I was ready to talk. I think I might have just destroyed my relationship, I said finally, staring into my wine glass. What happened? She asked, her voice gentle. I told her everything. The argument about the rehearsal dinner, my long walk through the city, the painful conversation with James afterward. I just couldn't take it anymore, I concluded. This wedding has become this beast that's devouring everything I love about our relationship. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Have you considered just canceling the big wedding and doing something simple? Just the two of you? Or with just immediate family? I sighed. I've thought about it, but we've already spent so much money, and James's parents, they would never forgive us. But this isn't about them. It's about you and James. I know, but it's complicated. James cares what his parents think, and they've contributed a lot financially. Money that comes with strings attached isn't a gift, Em. It's control. She was right, of course. But the reality was messier than that simple truth. We had accepted the Harringtons' contribution, had built our wedding plans around it. To back out now would be more than just a change of plans. It would be a rejection of their vision, their values, their world. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I love James. I want to marry him. But I'm starting to wonder if we're too different, if maybe we want incompatible things out of life. Sarah reached over to squeeze my hand. One lavish wedding doesn't mean your entire future is doomed. People can have different tastes in celebrations, but still share fundamental values. But what if it's not just about the wedding? What if it's a symptom of something deeper? Then, you need to figure that out before you walk down any aisle, no matter how expensive or simple it is. I stayed with Sarah for 3 days. During that time, James texted and called, his messages growing increasingly worried and then frustrated when I responded only briefly, asking for more time. On the 3rd night, as Sarah and I were making dinner, I received a text that made my heart race. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I have an idea I want to share with you. Can we meet tomorrow, please? I showed Sarah the message. What do you think he wants to talk about? She shrugged. Only one way to find out. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a small cafe, halfway between our apartment and Sarah's. When I arrived, James was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. Hi, he said as I sat down, his voice uncertain. Hi, I replied, equally hesitant. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the awkwardness of our separation hanging between us. How have you been? He asked finally. Okay, thinking a lot. You? The same. He took a deep breath. Emily, I'm sorry. I haven't been listening to you, not really, and I've been letting my parents influence our plans too much. The apology was a start, but I needed more. What made you realize that? He gave a rueful smile. Partly you're leaving, partly a conversation I had with my father, surprisingly enough. That caught me off guard. Your father? James nodded. He came to see me yesterday. Said my mother was worried about me, about us. And he asked me a question that really made me think. Is this wedding about you and Emily, or about fulfilling your mother's social expectations? And what did you say? I couldn't answer, because the truth is, I'm not sure anymore. We started with good intentions, with a vision of a wedding that reflected us. But somewhere along the way, that vision got lost in the noise of other people's expectations. I felt a glimmer of hope. That's exactly what I've been feeling. He reached across the table to take my hand. I know. And I should have heard you sooner. The thing is, Em, I got caught up in it all. The planning, the excitement, the idea of giving you this perfect day. I forgot to check whether it was still the day you wanted. It wasn't just about what I wanted, I said. It was about what we wanted, together. What made sense for us as a couple. You're right, and that's where I've been falling short. I've been letting my parents' vision overshadow ours. I squeezed his hand. So what's this idea you mentioned? He took another deep breath. What if we cancel the wedding? My heart dropped. You want to call off our engagement? No, he said quickly. God, no. I want to marry you more than anything. What I meant was, what if we cancel this wedding, the big, elaborate one we've been planning, and do something that actually feels like us instead? I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. After months of increasing tension, of feeling like my voice was being drowned out by his mother's opinions and his father's checkbook, here he was, offering an escape hatch. You're serious? I asked, searching his face for any sign of reluctance. Completely serious. His eyes were clear, determined. I realized something last night after our fight. I was lying awake, thinking about all of this, and I asked myself, what's more important, having the wedding my parents expect, or starting our marriage in a way that makes you happy? The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months began to lift. What would that even look like? I asked, allowing myself to imagine the possibilities. We've already put down so many deposits. I know. We'd lose some money. He shrugged. But my parents have insisted on paying for most of it, and honestly, if they're disappointed, that's for them to deal with. This is our life, Em. Our marriage. Not theirs. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I never thought I'd hear you say that. I should have said it sooner. I'm sorry it took me this long to get here. The coffee shop bustled around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. The steady hum of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clinking of cups. It all faded into the background as I considered what he was proposing. So, what are you thinking instead? I asked. His eyes lit up. Remember what we used to talk about, back when we first got engaged? Before my mom got involved and started talking about country clubs and 5-tier cakes. I smiled, remembering our early conversations. The beach. Just us. Our closest friends and family. No matching bridesmaids' dresses or formal sit-down dinner. Exactly. Something simple, meaningful. Something that feels like us. That sounds perfect, I admitted. But what about all the people who've already been invited? The venue? The caterer? We're only 3 months out. Details, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. We'll figure it out. Send out change of plans cards. Forfeit some deposits. It's just money, Em. Your father will have a fit. Let him. There was a new resolve in his voice I hadn't heard before. I'm 32 years old. It's time I stopped, living my life to please my parents. I looked at him with new eyes. This was the man I'd fallen in love with. Confident, decisive, willing to go against the grain. The man who'd gotten lost somewhere in the haze of wedding planning and parental expectations. What changed? I asked. Yesterday you were defending your mother's choice of centerpieces. Now you're ready to throw out the entire plan. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Last night, after you left, I called my sister. Olivia? I was surprised. While I'd always gotten along well with Daniel's younger sister, she and Daniel had a complicated relationship. She'd moved across the country after college, partly to escape the weight of their parents' expectations, the same expectations that were now threatening to crush our wedding. Yeah, I told her about our fight, about how unhappy you've been with all of this, and she just laughed. She laughed? Not meanly, more like knowingly. She said, "Welcome to life with Mom and Dad. They'll steamroll you if you let them." And then she asked me something that really hit home. "Is this wedding for you and Em, or is it for them?" I nodded, understanding washing over me. "And what did you say?" I couldn't answer at first, because I realized that somewhere along the way, this whole thing had become about making my parents happy, about living up to their social expectations. It stopped being about us. He squeezed my hand. But that ends now. I felt a surge of emotion, relief, love, hope, all mingling together. "I love you," I said simply. "I love you too, and I want to marry you in a way that feels authentic to who we are." He leaned forward. "So what do you say? Shall we blow up our wedding plans and start over?" The old me, the people pleaser who hated confrontation and always tried to keep the peace, would have hesitated. But the past few months had changed me. The constant battles over every detail of our wedding, the feeling of being sidelined in my own life event, had hardened something in me. I was tired of compromising on things that mattered. "Yes," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "Let's do it." Daniel's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Really? You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And it was true. In that moment, I felt more certain about our future than I had in months. But we need to talk about how we're going to handle this. It's not just about canceling venues and sending out notifications. It's about standing up to your parents. His expression sobered. "I know, and I'm ready for that conversation. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." "We should do it together," I said. "Present a united front." Agreed. He nodded. "They're coming over for dinner tomorrow night, remember? We could tell them then." My stomach tightened at the thought. Martha and Richard Hamilton were intimidating at the best of times. Martha, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and country club membership, had strong opinions about everything from napkin fabrics to which relatives deserved handwritten invitations versus printed ones. And Richard, though quieter, had a way of making his disappointment known without saying a word. "Tomorrow," I agreed, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll tell them together." Daniel must have sensed my apprehension. "Hey," he said softly, "whatever happens, we're in this together, and at the end of the day, this is our wedding, our marriage, our life." I nodded, drawing strength from his words. "You're right. And honestly, even if we lose all the deposits, even if your parents are furious, it will be worth it to have a wedding that actually feels like us." "Exactly." He grinned, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Besides, can you imagine your brother Jake suffering through a formal 5-course dinner in that stuffy country club?" I laughed, picturing my tattooed, motorcycle-riding brother trying to make small talk with Daniel's father's golf buddies. "He'd be miserable. He's been dreading it. And my cousin Mia would probably show up in hiking boots no matter what we told her." "She would," I agreed, smiling at the thought of Daniel's free-spirited cousin who seemed allergic to formal wear. For the first time in months, we were laughing together about the wedding instead of arguing about it. It felt good. "Right." "So," Daniel said, his expression turning serious again, "what do you want? If we could start over, design the perfect day without any outside pressure, what would it look like to you?" I closed my eyes, allowing myself to envision the day. Something outdoors, the beach, like we originally talked about. Or maybe that meadow up at Pine Ridge where we had our third date. I love that meadow, Daniel said softly. The way the light filters through the trees in the late afternoon. Exactly. Something simple but beautiful. Just our closest friends and family. People who truly know us and support our relationship. Good food, good music. No formal seating arrangements or stuffy traditions we don't care about. That sounds perfect, he said. What about your dress? I know you've already bought one. I made a face. While the dress hanging in my closet was objectively beautiful, a designer gown with intricate beading and a cathedral-length train, it had been heavily influenced by Martha's preferences. Honestly, I never really loved it. It's gorgeous, but it doesn't feel like me. It's too much. So we get you a new dress, something you love. Really? You wouldn't mind? I want you to feel like yourself on our wedding day, not like you're playing dress up to please my mother. I felt a fresh wave of appreciation for this man I'd agreed to spend my life with. Thank you, I said simply. No need to thank me. I should have been more supportive from the beginning. He took a sip of his now cold coffee. So, a small ceremony in the meadow. A dress you actually love. What else? I'd want Jake to officiate, I said, the idea coming to me suddenly. My brother had gotten ordained online years ago for a friend's wedding. He knows us better than anyone. I love that idea, Daniel said, surprising me. I'd assumed he'd want a traditional officiant, given his more conventional upbringing. Jake's been there since the beginning of our relationship. He's seen us through everything. He has, I agreed, warmth spreading through me at Daniel's enthusiasm. And for the reception, something casual. Maybe a bonfire on the beach afterward, with good wine and simple food. And dancing under the stars, Daniel added. Remember that night in Mexico when we found that little beach bar with the string, lights, and the local band? I smiled at the memory. We'd danced for hours on the sand, barefoot and carefree, the moon reflecting off the water. That was one of my favorite nights of our relationship. Mine too, he said softly. Let's recreate some of that magic. For the next hour, we sat in that coffee shop, reimagining our wedding day. With each idea we shared, each tradition we decided to discard, I felt lighter, more excited. This was what our engagement should have felt like all along. A collaboration, a shared vision, an expression of our unique bond. By the time we left, walking hand in hand down the busy sidewalk, we had the beginnings of a new plan. It wasn't fully formed yet. There were still logistics to figure out, people to notify, difficult conversations to have. But it was ours. And for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about marrying Daniel. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to face him in the darkness. Are you sure about this? I asked, needing one final confirmation before we upended everything. You won't resent me later for taking away the big wedding your parents wanted? He propped himself up on one elbow, his face dimly illuminated by the streetlight filtering through our curtains. I'm more sure about this than I've been about anything in a long time, he said. The only thing I would have regretted is starting our marriage with a wedding that made you unhappy. I reached out to touch his face, tracing the familiar contours with my fingertips. I love you, I whispered. I love you too, he replied, pulling me closer. And in 3 months, we're going to have the wedding we should have been planning all along. With that reassurance, I drifted off to sleep, curled against him, feeling more at peace than I had in months. The next day dawned bright and clear, but as evening approached, my anxiety began to mount. Daniel's parents were coming for dinner, and we'd agreed to tell them about our change of plans. I spent the afternoon stress cleaning our apartment, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, rearranging items that didn't need rearranging. Hey, Daniel said, catching me as I was about to start reorganizing the bookshelf for the second time. It's going to be okay. Is it? I asked, my voice higher than normal. Your mother has been planning this wedding for months. She's invited all her friends, told everyone at the country club. She's going to be devastated. Disappointed, yes, he conceded. Devastated is a bit strong. And even if she is, that's not on you. Or me. We're adults making a decision about our own wedding. I nodded, trying to believe him. I just hate confrontation. And your mother can be so intimidating. I know. But I'll be right there with you. United Front, remember? United Front, I repeated, taking a deep breath. What time will they be here? 7, which gives us, he glanced at his watch, about an hour to finish getting ready. We spent that hour preparing a simple but elegant dinner, roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, a green salad. Cooking together had always been one of our favorite activities, and the familiar rhythm helped calm my nerves. By the time the doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock, Martha Hamilton was nothing if not punctual. I felt more centered. Daniel gave me a reassuring smile before opening the door. Ready? He asked quietly. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. Ready? Martha swept in first, elegant in a camel-colored cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, her silver hair perfectly styled. She air-kissed my cheeks before handing me a bottle of expensive red wine. Emma, darling, you look tired. Are the wedding preparations getting to you? I told Daniel you should have hired a proper wedding planner, but he insisted you wanted to. Handle it yourselves. And just like that, before she'd even fully entered our apartment, she'd managed to criticize me and rewrite history in the same breath. It had been Martha, not me, who had rejected the idea of a wedding planner, insisting she knew exactly what needed to be done. I forced a smile. It's been busy, but we're managing, I said neutrally, accepting the wine. Thank you for the bottle. This is lovely. Richard followed behind his wife, giving me a more genuine smile and a warm hug. While he could be intimidating in his own way, he'd always been kinder to me than Martha. Good to see you, Emma, he said. Something smells delicious. We made roast chicken, Daniel said, taking his father's coat. Em's specialty. Wonderful, Richard said, rubbing his hands together. I'm starving. Martha had me at the club all afternoon, looking at possible setups for the rehearsal dinner. I shot a glance at Daniel, who gave me a subtle nod. We'd agreed to wait until after dinner to break the news, wanting everyone to enjoy the meal without tension. The next hour passed in a blur of carefully navigated conversation. We discussed neutral topics: Richard's golf game, Martha's garden, Club, a movie Daniel and I had recently seen. Each time Martha attempted to steer the conversation toward wedding details, one of us would gently redirect. Finally, as we were finishing our dessert, a simple apple tart I'd baked that afternoon, Martha set down her fork with a determined clink. All right, you two. What's going on? She asked, her keen eyes moving between us. You've been avoiding any mention of the wedding all evening, and you're exchanging these little looks like you have a secret. Is there something we should know? I glanced at Daniel, my heart rate accelerating. This was it. Daniel cleared his throat. Actually, Mom, Dad, there is something we want to talk to you about. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. You're not postponing, are you? Because the Hendersons already booked their flights from London, and you know they're very busy with Christopher's diplomatic schedule. No, we're not postponing, Daniel said firmly. But we have decided to make some changes to our plans. What kind of changes? Richard asked, his tone cautious. Daniel reached for my hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Significant ones, actually. We've realized that the wedding we've been planning, it isn't really reflective of who we are as a couple. Martha's expression hardened. What does that mean exactly? It means, I said, finding my voice, that We want something smaller, more intimate, something that feels more authentic to us. Authentic? Martha repeated, as if the word tasted strange on her tongue. The Ritz-Carlton is one of the most prestigious venues in the city. The florist we've hired does arrangements for the governor's mansion. What could be more authentic than the best? The best according to social standards, Daniel said gently, but not necessarily what makes us happy. Richard was watching us carefully, his expression thoughtful. What are you proposing instead? He asked. Daniel and I exchanged glances. We want to have the ceremony at Pine Ridge Meadow, he said. It's a place that's special to us, and we want to scale back the guest list to just our closest friends and family. Pine Ridge? Martha looked aghast. That's a public park. Anyone could wander through. And what about seating for the guests? Facilities? Weather contingencies? We'd work out those details, I said. Rent chairs, a small tent for backup in case of rain. But the idea is for it to be simple, natural. And the reception? Richard asked. We thought about a bonfire on the beach, Daniel said. Casual food, good wine, dancing under the stars. Martha was shaking her head before he'd even finished speaking. This is absurd. You've already put down non-refundable deposits. Invitations have been sent. I've told everyone at the club. We know there are practical considerations, I acknowledged, and we're prepared to deal with those. Send out change of plans cards, forfeit the deposits if necessary. If necessary? Martha's voice rose slightly. Of course it would be necessary. The Ritz doesn't just return your money because you've had some bohemian revelation 3 months before the event. Mom, Daniel said, an edge entering his voice. I understand this isn't what you had envisioned, but this is our wedding, our marriage, and we need to start it in a way that feels right to us. Martha turned to her husband, clearly expecting support. Richard, say something. Tell them how ridiculous this is. Richard was quiet for a moment, studying his son. Then, surprisingly, he sighed. Is this really what you both want? It is, Dad, Daniel said firmly. Richard nodded slowly. Then I think we should respect that. Richard, Martha looked scandalized. Martha, they're adults, he said calmly. They have the right to make their own decisions, even if we don't agree with them. I stared at Richard in surprise. Of all the reactions I'd anticipated, support from Daniel's father hadn't been one of them. Martha wasn't so easily swayed. This is embarrassing, she said, her voice tight with emotion. What am I supposed to tell everyone? That my son decided to get married in a public park like some hippie? Tell them whatever you want, Mom, Daniel said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Tell them we decided to do something more personal. Or tell them the venue fell through and we had to make last-minute changes. I don't really care. Daniel! Martha looked genuinely hurt now. How can you say that? After everything we've done, all the planning? I appreciate everything you've done, he said, softening slightly. I know you've put a lot of time and effort into this, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about what Em and I wanted. It became about your vision, your social expectations, and that's not fair to either of us. Martha fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. The financial aspect isn't an issue, I added, trying to ease the tension. We're prepared to take over the costs from here. We know we'll lose the deposits and we don't expect you to cover those. Richard waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about the money. We promised to pay for the wedding and we will, whatever form it takes. Dad, that's generous, but… No buts, Richard interrupted. That was our gift to you, and it stands. Martha was still sitting rigidly in her chair, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. I need some time to process this. It's a lot to take in. Daniel nodded. Of course. We don't expect you to be immediately on board. We just wanted to be honest with you. Well, you've certainly done that, she said. Her tone clipped. She stood up abruptly. Richard, I think it's time we headed home. Richard looked like he wanted to say more, but after a glance at his wife's face, he nodded and rose as well. Thank you for dinner, he said. It was delicious. The goodbye was awkward, with Martha barely managing a stiff hug and Richard giving us an apologetic look as they left. When the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Well, I said, turning to Daniel. That went about as well as could be expected, he finished for me. Mom will come around eventually. She just needs time to adjust to the idea. Your dad surprised me, I admitted. I thought he'd be more resistant. Daniel smiled slightly. Dad's always been more understanding than he gets credit for. He puts up a front for Mom's sake, but deep down, he just wants us to be happy. I began clearing the dishes, needing something to do with my hands. Do you think she'll try to talk? You out of it? When I'm not around? Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. Probably. But it won't work. I'm committed to this, Em. To us doing this our way. I turned in his arms, searching his face. Promise? I promise. He sealed it with a kiss. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of cancellations, new plans, and difficult conversations. We lost most of our deposits, as expected, but Richard was true to his word about still covering the costs. Martha remained cool and distant for the first week, sending terse text messages and making barely veiled comments about hasty decisions and social obligations. But gradually, as she saw our enthusiasm for our new plans, her resistance began to soften. The turning point came when I invited her to come with me to look at new dresses, something I hadn't done the first time around, partly because I'd known our tastes were so different. You really want me there? She asked when I called with the invitation, suspicion evident in her voice. I do, I said honestly. I value your opinion, Martha. I just need to find something that feels more like me this time. There was a pause. And what is like you exactly? I considered how to answer. Something simpler, less formal, but still beautiful and special. Another pause. I suppose I could rearrange my schedule, she said finally. The day of our dress appointment, I was nervous. But to my surprise, Martha approached it with an open mind. She listened as I explained what I was looking for, and when I tried on a simple, flowing gown with delicate lace details, a far cry from the heavily beaded, structured dress I'd purchased initially, her eyes softened. You look radiant, she said quietly. Really? You like it? It's not what I would have chosen, she admitted. But seeing you in it, it suits you, Emma. It truly does. It was the first genuine compliment she'd given me in months, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. After that day, something shifted between us. She stopped fighting against our new plans and began, tentatively, to offer help when asked. She connected us with a caterer who could do a more casual, farm-to-table menu for the beach bonfire. She helped me find a florist who specialized in wildflower arrangements for the meadow ceremony. She wasn't fully converted to our vision. I'd catch her sometimes looking wistful when she mentioned friends whose children were having traditional weddings, but she was trying, and that was more than I'd dared to hope for. Daniel's father, true to that first night, remained supportive throughout. I just want you kids to be happy, he said whenever the subject came up. And frankly, I'm looking forward to a wedding, where I don't have to wear a tuxedo. Our friends and family, for the most part, were enthusiastic about the change. My brother Jake was particularly thrilled. You mean I don't have to rent a penguin suit? He asked when we told him. And I get to officiate? This is the best news I've heard all year. Just don't make the ceremony too weird, I warned him. No obscure philosophical references or inside jokes only you understand. You wound me, sis, he said, clutching his heart dramatically. I'll be the epitome of wedding propriety, with just enough Jakeness to keep it interesting. Even Daniel's cousin Mia, who'd been dreading the formal affair, sent an excited text when she heard the news. Finally, a wedding where I can wear comfortable shoes. You two are geniuses. Not everyone was as understanding, of course. Some of Martha's friends were clearly miffed at being uninvited from what had promised to be the social event of the season. A few of Daniel's business associates seemed confused by the change of plans. And my great-aunt Sylvia, a traditionalist to her core, sent a 3-page handwritten letter expressing her concern about our unorthodox choices. But for every person who didn't get it, there were 3 who did, who told us they admired our courage, who said they wished they'd done something similar for their own weddings, who expressed genuine excitement about celebrating with us in a way that reflected who we really were. As the weeks passed and our new wedding day approached, I found myself falling in love with Daniel all over again. The way he stood firm against pressure, the way he collaborated with me on every decision, the way his eyes lit up when we found the perfect fairy lights for the beach bonfire or when the meadow permit finally came through, it all reminded me why I'd agreed to marry him in the first place. The night before our wedding, we broke with tradition and stayed together in our apartment. We'd decided that most of the old superstitions, not seeing each other before the ceremony, having a formal rehearsal dinner, spending our last night, as singles apart, didn't make sense for us. Instead, we ordered takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, opened a bottle of good wine, and sat on our balcony watching the sunset. Nervous about tomorrow? Daniel asked, refilling my glass. I considered the question. Not nervous, exactly, just intensely present, like every moment is heightened somehow. He nodded, understanding. I know what you mean. It's strange. With all the stress of the original plans, I never had this feeling. I was anxious about logistics, about whether everything would meet expectations, but not emotional about the actual meaning of it all. And now? Now I can't stop thinking about what we're actually doing tomorrow, making this lifelong commitment to each other, starting our married life. It feels real in a way it didn't before. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I'm glad we did this. Changed everything. Even with all the headaches and the difficult conversations, it was worth it. Completely worth it, he agreed, wrapping an arm around me. Though I'm pretty sure my mother is still having nightmares about guests sitting on hay bales. I laughed. She's been a good sport, all things considered. Better than I expected. She loves me, he said simply. And she's starting to see that this is genuinely what makes me happy. What makes us happy. We fell silent, watching as the last rays of sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. This time tomorrow, we'll be married, I said softly. Daniel turned to me, his expression serious. Best decision I ever made, asking you to marry me. Even better than canceling our original wedding plans? I teased. That's a close second, he admitted with a smile. But yes, even better than that. We stayed out on the balcony late into the night, talking about everything and nothing. Our hopes for the future, funny stories from our past, plans for our honeymoon in Costa Rica the following week. When we finally went to bed, I fell asleep, quickly, peaceful and content in a way I hadn't felt in months. The next morning dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of soft golden light that photographers dream about. I woke early before Daniel and slipped out onto the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city come to life below. Today was our wedding day. Not the wedding we'd initially planned, not the wedding his parents had envisioned, but our wedding, the one that felt right to us. Daniel joined me a few minutes later, sleep-rumpled and handsome, pressing a kiss to the top of my head before sitting down beside me with his own coffee. "Good morning, almost wife," he said with a smile. "Good morning, almost husband," I replied, feeling a flutter of excitement in my stomach. We had a lazy morning, enjoying breakfast together before our respective friends arrived to help us get ready. We'd decided to do most of our preparations separately, wanting to preserve at least some element of surprise for the ceremony. My best friend Lily arrived first, laden with bags containing everything from hair tools to emergency sewing supplies. "The bride squad has arrived," she announced dramatically as she entered, followed by my sister-in-law Tess and my college roommate Zoe. Daniel kissed me goodbye before retreating to our bedroom, where his brother and two closest friends would help him prepare. "See you at the meadow," he said, his eyes soft with emotion. "I'll be the one in the white dress," I teased. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Lily, who worked as a hairstylist, arranged my hair in loose waves with small white flowers woven throughout. Zoe, an amateur makeup artist, gave me a natural, glowing look. Tess made sure we all had enough champagne and kept us laughing with her outrageous stories. When it was finally time to put on my dress, the simple flowing gown Martha had approved of, I felt a moment of pure joy. This was right. All of it was right. "You look beautiful, Em," Lily said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Absolutely perfect." We arrived at Pine Ridge Meadow an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Daniel and I had decided against a formal processional, no walking down the aisle, no being given away. Instead, we would greet our guests together as they arrived, and then gather everyone in a circle for the ceremony. The meadow looked even more magical than I'd imagined. The late afternoon sun filtered through the surrounding trees, casting dappled light across the grass. Wildflowers bloomed in patches of purple and yellow. Simple white chairs were arranged in a circle, with an arch of greenery and more wildflowers marking the spot where Jake would officiate. Daniel was already there when we arrived, looking handsome in light gray pants and a white linen shirt. No tie, no jacket, just as we'd planned. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my heart skip. "Em," he said, crossing to me quickly, "you're a vision." "You clean up pretty well yourself," I said, taking in his relaxed but elegant appearance. He took my hands in his expression growing serious. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For fighting for this. For us. For not settling for a wedding that didn't feel right." I squeezed his hands. "We did it together." "We did," he agreed. "And now we get to enjoy every minute of it." Our guests began to arrive soon after, just 60 of our closest friends and family, down from the original list of nearly 200. True to our plan, Daniel and I greeted each person together, accepting hugs and well wishes with genuine joy. Martha and Richard were among the first to arrive. Martha, elegant in a pale blue dress that was more casual than her usual style, had tears in her eyes as she embraced me. "The meadow is beautiful," she said softly. "You were right. This suits you both." "Thank you," I said, touched by her approval. "That means a lot." "I just want you to be happy," she said, patting my cheek. "Both of you." Richard, looking relaxed in a light suit with no tie, gave me a warm hug. "You've made a beautiful bride, Emma," he said. "And more importantly, you've made my son very happy." Jake arrived last, looking uncharacteristically neat in dark jeans and a crisp white shirt, a leather-bound book clutched in his hands. "Ready to make this official?" he asked with a grin. "More than ready," Daniel and I said in unison, then laughed at our synchronicity. The ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for. Simple, heartfelt, deeply personal. Jake, despite my warnings, did manage to slip in a few philosophical references, but they were actually quite moving. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising not just love and fidelity, but partnership, respect, and understanding. When Jake finally pronounced us husband and wife, the gathered circle erupted in cheers. Daniel pulled me close for a kiss that was somehow both tender and passionate, and I felt my heart expand with pure happiness. Afterward, as planned, we all caravaned to the beach, where a bonfire was already blazing. Lanterns and string lights had been hung in the surrounding trees, creating a warm, magical glow as the sun began to set. Tables draped with simple LAs planned, we all caravanned to the beach, where a bonfire was already blazing. Lanterns and string lights had been hung in the surrounding trees, creating a warm, magical glow as the sun began to set. Tables draped, with simple linen cloths were set up in the sand, laden with platters of locally sourced food, grilled fish, fresh vegetables, artisan breads. Wine flowed freely, and a small band played mellow acoustic music that perfectly matched the setting. I kicked off my sandals almost immediately, digging my toes into the cool sand. Daniel did the same, and we walked hand in hand among our guests, accepting congratulations and sharing moments of laughter and joy. "So much better than a stuffy ballroom," my brother Jake said, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to me with a grin. "I can actually breathe here. And you can wear those ridiculous cargo shorts without judgment," I teased, nodding at his attire. He'd changed out of his ceremony clothes into something more comfortable, as had many of our guests. "Exactly," he said, raising his glass in a small toast. "To weddings where people can actually be themselves." I clinked my glass against his. "I'll drink to that." As the night progressed, the atmosphere grew increasingly relaxed and joyful. People moved between tables, mingling and chatting. Some danced barefoot on the sand to the band's music. Others gathered around the bonfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows for impromptu s'mores, an addition that had been Daniel's idea, inspired by camping trips from his childhood. Even Martha seemed to be enjoying herself, her initial reservations apparently forgotten as she chatted animatedly with my mother, the 2 of them sharing a plate of chocolate-dipped strawberries. "Your mother-in-law is actually quite charming when she lets her guard down," my mom told me later, when I found a quiet moment to sit with her. She showed me pictures of her garden on her phone. "Did you know she grows prize-winning dahlias?" "I had no idea," I admitted with a laugh. "There's a lot about Martha I'm still learning." Mom squeezed my hand. "That's the journey of marriage, sweetheart. Getting to know not just your partner, but the whole ecosystem of people who come with them." "Is that wisdom from your own experience?" I asked. My parents had been married for 34 years, through ups and downs, career changes, and health scares. "Let's just say I've learned a thing or 2 along the way," she said with a wink. "But the most important thing is what you and Daniel have already figured out. Your marriage has to be true to who you are as a couple, not what anyone else expects or wants." I hugged her, grateful for her support throughout everything. "Thanks, Mom, for always being in my corner." "Always," she promised. As the night wore on, Daniel found me sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance against the darkening sky. He sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Happy?" he asked softly. I leaned into him, taking a moment to really feel the contentment that had settled deep in my bones. "Completely," I answered truthfully. "You?" "I've never been happier," he said. Then, with a hint of mischief in his voice, "Although I have to admit, I'm looking forward to what comes next." "Our honeymoon?" I asked, thinking of the small beachfront cottage waiting for us in Costa Rica. "That too," he said with a smile. "But I meant our life together, building our future, day by day, making decisions together about what's right for us, not what anyone else thinks we should do." "Like we did with this wedding," I said, understanding. "Exactly like that." He kissed my temple. "This was just the beginning, Em. The first of many times we'll need to stand our ground and do what's true to us." "I'm ready for it," I said, realizing I meant it. The past few months had been challenging, but they'd also been transformative. I'd found a strength in myself I hadn't known existed, a willingness to advocate for what I truly wanted, even when it meant disappointing others or facing conflict. "I know you are," Daniel said. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching our friends and family enjoy the celebration we'd created. Mia was teaching Richard an elaborate dance move, much to everyone's amusement. Jake was deep in conversation with Daniel's brother, the two of them gesturing emphatically about something. Lily had somehow convinced Martha to try a s'more, and the older woman was laughing as melted marshmallows stuck to her fingers. "We did good," I said, taking in the scene with satisfaction. "We did great," Daniel corrected with a grin. Later, as the night grew cool and the party began to wind down, Daniel pulled me to my feet. "Dance with me," he said softly, leading me a little away from the bonfire to where the sand met the gentle lapping of waves. The band, now down to just a guitarist and a vocalist, began playing a slow, sweet melody. Daniel took me in his arms, and we swayed together under the stars, the sound of the ocean providing a rhythmic backdrop to the music. "Thank you," I whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For being brave enough to change course. For listening when I said I wasn't happy. For putting our relationship above everything else." He pulled back slightly to look at me, his eyes reflecting the distant glow of the bonfire. "You don't need to thank me for that, Em. That's what partners do. That's what I promised today, in front of everyone we love. To listen to you, to respect you, to make decisions with you, not for you." "I know," I said, "but still thank you. And I promise to do the same for you. Always." He smiled, pulling me close again. "Always," he echoed. As we danced there on the beach, the waves whispering nearby and the stars shining above, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This was exactly where we were meant to be, exactly how we were meant to begin our marriage. Authentically, joyfully, surrounded by love and light. The wedding we'd originally planned would have been beautiful in its own way, I knew. The flowers would have been exquisite, the food impeccable, the venue glamorous and photo-ready. But it wouldn't have been us. It wouldn't have reflected the couple we truly were or the life we wanted to build together. Instead, we'd created something meaningful, something that honored not just the formal commitment we were making, but the spirit in which we were making it, with honesty, with courage, with a willingness to forge our own path even when it was difficult. As the song ended and Daniel dipped his head to kiss me, I made a silent vow to myself. I would carry this lesson forward into our marriage, the knowledge that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that go against convention, that prioritize personal truth over external expectations. We'd started our journey to the altar with good intentions, with a vision of a wedding that reflected us. And though that vision had gotten temporarily lost in the noise of other people's expectations, we'd found our way back to it, back to each other, back to what truly mattered. And in the end, that was the greatest gift we could have given ourselves on our wedding day. Not the perfect flowers or the prestigious venue or the 5-tier cake, but the courage to begin our marriage exactly as we intended to live it. Authentically, honestly, and on our own terms. Later that night, after most of our guests had departed and we'd changed into more comfortable clothes, Daniel and I walked along the shoreline, hand in hand. The bonfire had burned down to glowing embers, and the moon cast a silvery path across the water. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. I thought about the question carefully, wanting to be honest. "About changing our plans? Not a single one," I said decisively. "Although I do feel a little bad about the money your parents lost on deposits." Daniel shrugged. "Dad doesn't care about that. And even Mom admitted tonight that this wedding suited us better than what she'd been planning." "She did?" I asked, surprised. "When?" "While you were talking with your brother. She pulled me aside and said she'd been wrong to push so hard for her vision. That seeing us today, how happy and relaxed we were, made her realize this was exactly what we needed. Warmth spread through me at his words. That means a lot. It does, he agreed, though I think Dad might have had some influence there. I overheard him telling her at the ceremony that he'd never seen me look so genuinely happy, and that maybe she should consider that her greatest success as a mother. I smiled, thinking of Richard's quiet wisdom. Your dad is pretty great. He is, Daniel said fondly. And now I understand him better, I think. Why he's always gone along with Mom's plans, even when they weren't exactly what he would have chosen. Because at the end of the day, what mattered to him wasn't the details. It was the core of their relationship, the love they share despite their differences. That's a good lesson to take into our marriage, I observed. It is, he agreed. Knowing when to stand firm on the things that truly matter and when to let go of the things that don't. We continued walking, the cool water occasionally washing over our bare feet as the tide began to rise. The night was peaceful, with just the sound of waves and distant night birds to accompany our thoughts. So what now? I asked eventually. Besides Costa Rica, I mean. Daniel seemed to consider the question deeply. Now, we build the life we want, one decision at a time, like we did with this wedding. That's simple, huh? I teased. He laughed. Well, I didn't say it would be easy. Just simple in concept. We keep checking in with each other, making sure we're on the same page. We don't let outside pressure, whether it's from our families or society or whatever, dictate choices that are fundamentally ours to make. I nodded, appreciating his perspective. And when we disagree? Because we will, you know. Then we talk it through. We listen to each other. We compromise when we can and find creative solutions when we can't. He stopped walking and turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. The key is that we decide together. No one else gets a vote. I like that approach, I said softly. Me too, he replied, leaning down to kiss me gently. And I like you, Mrs. Hamilton. I like you, too, Mr. Hamilton, I responded with a smile. Even if your mother does drive me slightly crazy sometimes. He laughed, pulling me into an embrace. She drives everyone slightly crazy sometimes. It's part of her charm. We stood there on the beach for a long time, holding each other as the waves lapped at our feet and the stars shone overhead. Tomorrow we would leave for Costa Rica, for 2 weeks of sun and relaxation and the official start of our honeymoon. But in many ways, our journey had already begun. Not just today with our vows, but months ago when we'd made the decision to forge our own path, to create a wedding that truly reflected who we were as a couple. It hadn't been the easiest route. There had been difficult conversations, hurt feelings, logistical nightmares. But standing here now, my head resting against the steady beat of Daniel's heart, I knew without a doubt that it had been worth it. We had started our marriage as we meant to continue it, with honesty, with courage, and with an unwavering commitment to building a life that felt true to us. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentically, genuinely ours. And really, what more could anyone ask for? 6 months later, I sat at our kitchen table, sorting through the mail that had accumulated during our weekend away. Daniel and I had just returned from celebrating his birthday with a short trip to the mountains, a spontaneous decision we'd made the previous week when we realized both of our work schedules were unexpectedly clear. Anything interesting? Daniel asked, entering the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one in front of me before taking the seat opposite. Bill, advertisement, I said, flipping through the stack. Oh, and a card from your mom. Another one? Daniel raised his eyebrows. That's the 3rd one this month. She's really embracing this new digital detox thing, isn't she? I smiled, thinking of how Martha had surprised us all by announcing at Thanksgiving that she was reconnecting with the lost art of letter writing and reducing her screen time. It was just one of many small changes she'd made since our wedding. Changes That seemed to be making her happier and, coincidentally, easier to be around. "I think it's sweet," I said, opening the envelope. Inside was a handmade card featuring a pressed flower from Martha's garden. The message was brief, but warm. "Daniel and Emma. Just a note to say I'm looking forward to your visit next weekend. Richard has been experimenting with a new marinade for the salmon, and I've finally perfected that lemon tart recipe Emma mentioned liking. All my love. Mom." I passed the card to Daniel, who read it with a soft smile. "She's different, isn't she?" he said. "Since the wedding?" "She is," I agreed. "More relaxed, more herself, somehow." "I think watching us stand up for what we wanted gave her permission to examine her own life more critically," Daniel mused. To ask herself what traditions and expectations she was following just because she thought she should, versus what actually makes her happy. "Like quitting the country club board?" I suggested. Martha had stepped down from her position a month after our wedding, claiming she wanted more time for creative pursuits, which had turned out to include everything from watercolor painting to bread baking. "Exactly," Daniel nodded. "And inviting your mom to join her garden club, even though half the members were scandalized because your mom uses, gasp, organic methods instead of conventional ones." I laughed at the memory of Martha defiantly defending my mother's gardening choices to her more traditional friends. "They've become quite the rebels in their own way, haven't they? Our moms?" "They have," Daniel agreed with a chuckle. "And Dad's loving it. He told me last week that he hasn't seen Mom this happy in years." I sipped my coffee, reflecting on how much had changed in the months since our wedding. Not just with our families, but with us as well. The confidence we'd gained from standing our ground on our wedding plans had carried forward into other aspects of our lives. Daniel had finally left the corporate law firm he'd been unhappy at for years, taking a position with a nonprofit environmental organization, a move his father had supported wholeheartedly and his mother had eventually come to accept. I had turned down a promotion that would have meant more money but less creative control, choosing instead to stay in my current role where I had the freedom to pursue projects I was passionate about. Small decisions, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but important ones for our happiness, for the life we were building together. "I was thinking," Daniel said, interrupting my reverie, "about that conversation we had on the beach after our wedding." "Which one?" I asked. "We had several. The one about building our life one decision at a time, about not letting outside pressure dictate our choices." I nodded, remembering. "What about it?" Daniel hesitated, then reached across the table to take my hand. "I think it might be time for another one of those decisions." My heart quickened. There was something in his tone, a mix of nervousness and excitement, that suggested this wasn't a small matter. "Okay," I said carefully. "What kind of decision?" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the house. Our current home, a downtown apartment we'd chosen primarily for its proximity to both our workplaces, had been a source of low-grade tension for months. The lease was coming up for renewal, and we'd been circling around the question of whether to stay or move, both of us aware that our preferences didn't entirely align. "What about it?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea what was coming. "I know you love being in the city," he said, his eyes earnest. "The energy, the convenience, being able to walk to your favorite cafes and shops. And I've loved living here with you these past few years, but you miss having space," I finished for him. "A yard, trees, somewhere to grow things." He nodded, looking relieved that I understood. "I do. More than I realized, actually. That weekend we spent at my parents' place last month just puttering, around in their garden, building that birdhouse with my dad. It reminded me how much I love being outdoors, working with my hands." I squeezed his hand, knowing this had been difficult for him to bring up. Daniel had agreed to the apartment when we first moved in together, knowing how much I loved urban living. He'd never complained, never made me feel guilty about his compromise. But I'd seen the wistfulness in his eyes when we visited friends, with homes in the suburbs, the way he lingered in hardware stores, looking at gardening tools he had no use for in our current life. "So, you want to move?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I want us to consider it," he said carefully. "To talk. About what we both need, what would make us happy in the long term, just like we did with the wedding." I nodded slowly, appreciating his approach. Not pushing his preference, not assuming I would resist, but opening a dialogue. "I think that's fair," I said. "And honestly, I've been thinking about it too." "You have?" He looked surprised. I took another sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. The apartment made sense when we were both working downtown, when our lives revolved around being in the city. But things have changed. You're working from home 3 days a week now. I'm traveling more for work. We both talk about wanting more space for hobbies, for entertaining. Hope flickered in his eyes. "So you're not opposed to the idea?" "I'm not saying we should move to a farm in the middle of nowhere," I clarified with a small smile. "But I could see us in a neighborhood that's a bit less urban. Somewhere with a garden for you, but still walkable, still with some of that city energy." "I love." Daniel's face lit up. "Really? You'd be okay with that?" "More than okay," I said honestly. "I want you to be happy, Daniel. And I think I've been holding on to this urban identity that maybe doesn't fit who I am now, who we are together." I paused, thinking about it more deeply. My resistance wasn't really about loving the city so much as it was about fear of turning into your parents, I guess. Living that conventional suburban life that never appealed to me. Daniel laughed, softly. "I think we've proven we're perfectly capable of making unconventional choices, regardless of where we live." "True," I acknowledged with a smile. "Our wedding made that pretty clear." "So," he said, eyes bright with excitement, "shall we start looking? See what's out there?" I nodded, feeling a familiar sense of rightness settle over me. This was how decisions should be made in a marriage, with openness, with mutual respect, with a genuine desire to find solutions that worked for both partners. "Let's do it," I said. "But let's be intentional about it. Make a list of what we both need, what we're willing to compromise on, what's non-negotiable." "Exactly," Daniel agreed eagerly. "Just like we did when we reimagined the wedding. We focus on what matters most to each of us, and we find a way to honor those priorities." I smiled, remembering how that approach had led us to the perfect wedding day. "It worked pretty well last time." "It did," he said, lifting my hand to press a kiss against my knuckles. "And I have a feeling it'll work just as well this time." As we spent the rest of that morning making lists and researching neighborhoods, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come since that pivotal moment when Daniel had suggested canceling our original wedding plans. That decision, scary and disruptive as it had seemed at the time, had given us more than just a wedding. Day we could be proud of. It had given us a template for our marriage, a framework for making decisions that honored both our individual needs and our shared values. Life would continue to present us with challenges, I knew. There would be more decisions to make, more external expectations to navigate, more moments when we'd need to figure out what was right for us, rather than what others thought we should do. But I wasn't afraid of those challenges anymore. We had found our way once before, when the stakes felt impossibly high. We could do it again, and again after that, building our life together one authentic decision at a time. That night, as we lay in bed discussing potential neighborhoods and house features, Daniel rolled onto his side to face me, his expression suddenly serious. "I never thanked you properly," he said softly. "For what?" I asked, puzzled. "For having the courage to speak up when you weren't happy with the wedding plans. for risking conflict, risking disappointing people, to fight for what you knew was right for us. I smiled, touched by his words. You don't need to thank me for that. I do, though, he insisted, because if you hadn't, we'd have had that big fancy wedding that wasn't us. And more importantly, we might never have learned how to have these conversations, how to make decisions that are truly right for our relationship, rather than just going along with what's expected. I considered this, realizing the truth in what he was saying. That difficult moment, that painful confrontation, had indeed been a turning point for us, not just in terms of our wedding, but in how we approached our relationship as a whole. Then I should thank you too, I said, for listening, for being willing to change course even when it meant disappointing your parents, even when it meant losing deposits and dealing with judgment from people who didn't understand. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. I think we make a pretty good team, Mrs. Hamilton. I think we do, Mr. Hamilton, I agreed, settling against him with a contented sigh. Outside our window, the city continued its nighttime symphony of distant sirens and passing cars, the urban soundtrack that had been the background noise of our marriage thus far. Soon enough, that might change to crickets and rustling leaves, to the quieter rhythms of a less urban setting. But the most important things would remain constant: our commitment to each other, our determination to build a life that reflected our true selves, our courage to make decisions based on what was right for us, rather than what others expected. We had started with good intentions, with a vision of a life together that reflected who we were. And though that vision might evolve and shift over time, though we might sometimes lose our way temporarily in the noise of other people's expectations, we now knew how to find our way back, to each other, to our shared values, to the authentic life we were building together, one decision at a time. In the warmth of Daniel's arms, in the home we had created together and would soon reimagine in a new setting, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for that difficult moment months ago when I'd finally found the courage to speak my truth. It hadn't been easy, but the most important things rarely were. And in the end, that willingness to face discomfort, to risk conflict for the sake of authenticity, that was the true foundation of our marriage. Not the ceremony that had formalized our commitment, beautiful as it had been, but the honest conversations and brave choices that had preceded it and would continue to shape our journey together in the years to come. I love you, I whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Daniel replied, his voice soft but certain. Every authentic, complicated, wonderful bit of you. And in those words, in the secure embrace of his arms, I found the answer to the question that had started it all, the one I couldn't answer when Daniel first asked me what was wrong with our wedding plans. I was sure now. Sure of us, sure of our ability to navigate life's complexities together, sure that we could build a future that was genuinely ours, regardless of what anyone else thought it should look like. And that certainty, that hard-won confidence in ourselves and our partnership, was the greatest gift our wedding journey had given us. Far more precious than any ritual or reception could ever be,